The Rebel Capitalist Show.
All right, guys, it gives me a great deal of pleasure to welcome someone back to the Rebel Capitalist Show. He's not only someone, he's my good buddy and business partner, Ken McElroy. Ken, welcome back to the Rebel Capitalist Show.
Always great to be on, George. Thanks, man. It's, Happy New Year.
Yeah, that's right. We're going into the New Year's Eve tomorrow night.
Yep.
It should be a lot of fun, but I want to dive into real estate. That's what everyone that's watching this video or listening to this podcast, they really want to get inside and get the insider information from Ken McElroy himself, the ultimate real estate guru here on YouTube. And for those of my audience who don't know, you manage about $1 billion worth of real estate. In fact, before we started the recording, you said that you're just trying to wrap up another $120 million worth of deals. You're trying to purchase that much, or was it 2 or 3 more apartment complexes?
Yeah, 3 more. Yeah, we bought, we did 5 ground up construction deals in 2021, and we bought about 1,200 units, Austin, Houston primarily. So we did about a little north of 300 million last year. And, we're it's a $122 million deal I'm working on right now. We're hoping to get into escrow here in the next month and, close in the first quarter of next year. So as you know, these things take 60, 90 days by the time you close on them. But we have a ton of stuff in the pipeline at all times. So it's a very exciting time.
One thing I hear from just kind of the average Joe and Jane where they're thinking about maybe buying a rental property. Obviously, they're very concerned because prices are at all-time high just for inflation. They see the everything bubble all around them. They see all this risk and they're like, oh my gosh, I don't know if I should, buy a rental property. And then they say, well, but there's a 30-year fixed rate mortgage. I mean, those are super cheap and it's kind of like shorting the dollar. And if I'm getting positive cash flow, there's kind of an angle there. But their biggest concern, I think, is what about rent? If we go through a big economic recession or depression or something like we had in 2020, what happens if my renters can't pay the rent? Then what do I do? And I think that's everyone's I think that concern is even more pervasive than the concern that we're in kind of a housing market bubble. So I want to get your opinion on that, Kenny, but then I also want to go back and revisit what happened with you and the rent payments during 2020 and into 21 and try to kind of dissect why maybe a lot of your renters were still able to pay rent, and if you maybe see that playing out in the future if we have a recession and don't have a lot of the stimmy checks.
So great question, George. I think, first of all, people have to realize that the economy has always done booms and busts. And I think that's an important piece to first acknowledge, because these kinds of conversations come up every single time we're in what I would consider to be a boom.
Right.
A boom would be when rents are at all-time high, housing prices are all-time high, those kinds of things. So we're just in another time frame. I went through this in 2008. I went through this in the early 2000s. I went through this in the 90s. And so what happens each time is the biggest issue governments have, and you can see they're already tackling it, is homelessness. And I know it's kind of brutal to say, but you think about what happens if people can't pay rent, right? The next step, based on the given laws and all that stuff, unfortunately, is getting evicted and all that kind of stuff. Now, we tested this all during the pandemic. So this is kind of your second part of the question. When my partner and I, we have 10,000 tenants. And we're like, okay, like we had March was collected, but we were like, okay, we don't know who's not going to pay in April and May. And so,
I mean, I could imagine you had a lot of sleepless nights back then.
We did. Yeah, we're like, oh my gosh, because, and so what we did, as a pro tip here, is that we decided that we were going to do 6 months mortgage payment in reserves on all our projects. So
prior to the pandemic.
Right? Yeah. So we had 3 months before that, but then we went to 6. So I think, just as a rule, if you're going to own this stuff and you're going to play in this game, you have to have reserves for capital, for mortgages, and disruptions. And what happened was, it's unprecedented. The government, the state, they've stepped in and said, okay, renters don't have to pay What they actually said was that you couldn't evict them.
Right.
So they didn't actually say they didn't have to pay. They said you couldn't evict them. And so that, of course, has been lifted in most areas, not all areas, by the way. I think, New York still has that. And St. Paul, Minnesota just put rent caps on things. And so the government is stepping in right now to try to keep this issue under, from getting too rampant. And the issue that we're facing, I don't think the governments will ever allow tenants to be evicted. And so they're going to fund the landlord. They're going to fund the tenant, just like they did through the stimmy checks. The other thing that they've done in the past, Section 8, tax credit housing, all that stuff, which are historical programs, I think they're going to expand those. Section 8 pays the landlord. Mm-hmm. That's how it works. So those are already in place. And so I think you're just going to start to see some expansion of those kinds of policies, as this starts to get a little bit worse.
So more subsidies, basically,
yes,
to pay rent. Yeah,
absolutely. 100%. Because what's the alternative? The landlord's not going to be able to pay the mortgage. The mortgages are going to default. It's going to obviously don't forget, everyone out there they're the ones that actually hold this mortgage paper, right? So this debt that we have, the mortgages, it's all sold off in these secondary markets anyway. So the mortgage-backed securities literally is a mortgage backed by securities and sold off. And so that was, if you watch the movie The Big Short, that's what happened. They shorted the mortgage market, and that's how a lot of these guys got really, really wealthy when Lehman went down and all that. So I don't think that's going to happen, George. And I think we'll see money into the pockets.
Yeah. So there's like a trickle up systemic risk instead of trickle down economics, where people are rich here, they spend the money and that trickles down to the poor people. The people that are having a hard time paying rent, if they don't, then that filters up through you're not paying your loan payment. And then whoever's holding the bag, which are the banksters maybe, or the pension funds, they're the ones that are going to go bust if those people at the bottom or the renters aren't paying their rent. So it's kind of like an inverse approach. What did the rents do back during the GFC? I'd be very curious because we didn't have stimmy checks back then. Obviously, the labor market was far different in that instead of having a labor shortage, we had a labor surplus. I mean, I was telling a story just the other day, Kenny, about when I got involved with real estate in 2012. It was the first single family homes that I purchased, and I was going to just play my own GC, general contractor. Mm-hmm. So I sent out just a little ad on Craigslist, and it was for maybe $12-15 an hour just for some handy men or tile guys, something like that. I remember within an hour, this was 2012, within an hour I probably had 100 resumes or just people texting, just inquiring about the ad. I went back in 2017 to do some maintenance on a property, ran the exact same Craigslist ad for $20 an hour, and I didn't get a thing. Like I got pretty much zero response. So my point there is that that's what should happen in a recession, is that there should be a lack of jobs and therefore a lack of purchasing power. So you owned a lot of apartment complexes back then. You bought more. Did you see people struggle with rent payments a lot more during the GFC compared to what we saw in 2020?
Yeah, it was very different, however. And there was another thing that happened. So for sure, people were disrupted financially. There's no question about that. But then what happened was that what people forget is that when people lose their homes, they downgrade to rentals.
Oh, right.
So we had, we used to call it jingle mail. They would mail their keys back to the bank. So that those people defaulted back into rentals. Now that could have been a rental home, it could have been a rental apartment or whatever. And so what happened under actually Bush kind of started this, where he said, "Hey, let's we want everyone to be a homeowner." And so that all started. And then Obama kind of stepped in after that. Well, that was already going. And what happened was the home ownership rate got up to 69%. And so every 1% would take people out of the rental market, was like 1 million people. So now this was back a while ago, but 1% equal, let's say 1 million. So at 68, 67, 66, it either goes back to rentals or goes back into home ownership. And so that all popped, as we know, and that created this displacement back into rentals. And so the opposite side of that, George, you think about it, and you study supply and demand a lot. So all these people came out of homeowners ownership into rentals. It created this massive demand. That is actually the rent run we're seeing right now. And it started 10 years ago with all these people. And so what we're starting to see are these people going back into home ownership again. But at the same token, during that 10-year period, guess what we didn't do? Add supply.
Right.
Exactly. So you got to look at the mass and how they displace. And of course, each market is very, very different based on the policies and the safety, the governmental issues, the property taxes, rent growth, all that kind of stuff, and jobs. So all of that is you have to study all of those things to kind of see where it popped, how hard it's going to pop, where it's going to grow next, all those kinds of things.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So during the GFC, you'd think people would struggle paying their rent, which maybe they did, but you had so many homeowners that were new potential customers, I guess, or new potential tenants that, if my memory serves me right, we didn't see too much of a drop in rents during like 2010, 2009 to call it 2012 or so. Maybe not a big increase, but maybe a flat line. And then starting, my memory serves me right, with single family, starting in about 2014 is when I started to raise rents. And then lately, I mean, they've just completely exploded because this lack of supply for rentals and for new homes. Do you think that new homes can get to a point where they're so expensive that no one can afford them, and that creates an even larger pool of renters?
I do, and I think that's happening right now. And the other thing that happened during that time, George, if you think about it, home development, residential development, that pulls people out of rentals. A home builder is actually looking at that renter and trying to make them a homeowner. That's how the system is. So when it reverses, then they all pour back in. And so what's happening right now is we're seeing the top of, or close to the top of, in many markets, the affordability side. And a lot of that has to do with the supply chain issues on what it costs to build a home, which is driving costs way up. And then if the Fed increases the rates like they say they're going to do after next year, then that's actually going to make it even worse. That's going to drive even more people into rentals.
So let's discuss the costs that you were just referring to. And this is a big deal, I think, for investors and homeowners, because I mean, I haven't purchased a home in the United States for a long, long time. I've been selling, but when I was very cognizant of the price per square foot to build new, because in my mind, I said, okay, well, if I can, let's say it's and back then, I mean, this is 2012, it's probably 120 a square foot, maybe 130 a square foot to build, excluding land. That's the cost of construction. And so I said, if I can buy it at $50 a square foot, which you could buy back then, or maybe $75, then, in order for new supply to come online and compete with me, prices have to go to at least 120 or 130 a square foot, considering there has to be some margin in there for people to actually make a profit. So therefore, you've kind of got a little bit of a buffer there. So that said, where are prices today for building new? I know you focus on apartments, but I think it would be pretty similar when we look at the price per square foot for kind of a starter home, like a single family house that's not too extravagant with the finishes.
Yeah. So, well, a couple things. One, I don't want to, I love how you started this whole question, because I think the way we look at markets, the way we look at investing is exactly how you do when it comes to the components and the cost per foot. And a lot of people don't focus on this, but I tell everybody, like, I was buying in Texas at $40, $50 a foot from the banks directly for properties that cost 150 to replace.
There you go.
So yeah, and so it's really important that people kind of always look at this. And so, and I'll just give you an example. Right now, we both live in Phoenix. Right now in Phoenix, if I was to buy an apartment building, it would cost close to $400,000 per unit to buy it. I'm talking about mid-90s product. If I was to buy that exact product in, say, Houston, Texas, it would be 200. The exact same product, the exact same year built. It's just that's how different.
But then what are the rents? Are the rents equivalent?
Well, exactly my point. So, but what we do is, so when we're looking at building versus buying, so in Phoenix right now, we're not buying because we have to buy at 400 a foot, but we can build at 250. In Houston, we would not build because we can buy at 200. So as we're looking at markets, we're trying to decide where do we want to build and where do we want to buy, because we do both. Right. So it's the same thing with single family houses. So if you go to the National Association of Home Builders, the NAHB, on their website, they'll tell you that the cost of a new home is now north of $40,000 more than it was just a year ago due to these supply chain issues. So
the cost to build is what
the cost to build. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's the average cost to build. I think it was a 2,000 square foot home. So you have to be looking at these things. And so those costs are real. People, the homeowner, the home builder, is not absorbing that. I can assure you. Right. So if a home was, say, $300,000 to build, and now it's $350,000, I can assure you the consumer is actually buying that, financing that. And so that's what's kind of driving a lot of these up. And if the Fed increases their interest rates like they say they're going to do, it's going to get even worse. It's going to create a pretty good slowdown on the sales side for single family homes,
which means more renters for
yes.
apartments or
right,
for single
right.
family homes.
Yep.
Right. Yeah.
And on the other side of that, we're severely undersupplied on the renter side. So we have that happening on the homeowner side, and then we're severely undersupplied on the renter side because, from my standpoint, I've got 5 projects under construction. My costs are going up. My OSB, my wire, my lumber, my drywall, my labor, all that stuff's going up. So anything that I have being constructed today, at the end, when the dust settles, is going to be a lot more expensive than what I thought it was going to be when I started the process. So everyone's dealing with this issue right now. And the only way out of that, George, is rent growth. And if the market doesn't support it, it doesn't matter to me. It doesn't care, right? The market supports what it supports, but we do have a supply issue, which is, and we have a higher demand issue and a lower supply issue, which unfortunately, renters are going to be into a rough few years, in my opinion, and because we're already seeing. I just today was looking at the rent growth for Houston, 10% projected next year. 10. That is really, really not good. I mean, as a landlord, if you own stuff, most people would say, "Oh, that's great for us." It's not great. It's supposed to be probably 2, 3, 4%, just kind of keeping up with inflation. And it's not good when you're raising a tenant's rent $100 to $200 to $300 every year, and because that creates even more displacement. So we're heading into a really rough time for renters.
Yeah. And normally when inflation's at 2 or 3% is measured by CPI, but especially now when it's at most likely probably a lot higher than the CPI at 10%, and wages are only going up by, let's say, 3 or 4% in nominal terms, and then you got to bump rents by 10% to keep up with costs, and that's what really puts the squeeze. I don't know if I told you this, but just the other day, that I rent a condominium here where I am right now.
Yep.
And the building, and my lease is up in the middle of January, and the property manager said that if I want to rent this again for 2022, that they're going to increase the rent by 30%.
Yeah.
30%. They're going to increase my rent payments by $1,500 a month.
Yeah.
So
George, I know we're having the same thing. Well, we have I have a property management company. As you know, we got a couple hundred people in that company. Our rents are going up so fast in our portfolio. We looked at one property in Phoenix. We're $365 per unit below market. And we haven't,
and that's a huge percentage, because you're not charging $5,000 a month for rent.
Nope.
That's what, $1,800 a month or something.
Yep. So so what's happening is, because there's a supply issue and a big demand issue. In your case, the person you spoke with, they know if you leave, it's rented tomorrow.
Yeah, right.
So that's the issue. And so that's not good. Honestly, as a landlord, I'm just saying, so what's going to happen is cities, states, they're going to step in. You're going to see more rent control. You're going to see expanded Section 8 programs that cap the amount you can raise stuff. Rent specifically. St. Paul, Minnesota already did this. They capped rent. And so all the smart money, of course, moved away to other markets, because the last thing, and lenders, I was talking to Berkadia, who's owned by Buffett. I was talking to one of their top guys out of San Francisco. He was in my office 2 weeks ago. And he goes, Kenny, the coasts, they're about 15% vacant, both coasts, except for Florida. And inland, he's like, I've never seen anything like it. It's all full. So everybody's like migrating inward, right? They're out of Washington, Oregon, California, and I'm generalizing, of course. But he said it's putting a lot of pressure on all this other stuff. And what lenders are starting to look at now, because he brought up St. Paul, is they're saying they just cross it off the list. We're not lending there, because
if there's rent control.
Yeah. I mean, smart. If you wouldn't, right?
Yeah, right.
I mean, yeah. So they're starting to look at these government policies. And by the way, there is a rent issue. There is a rent growth issue and affordability issue coming, and there's already one right now. We're just we're in the first quarter right now, and so if you have anything, my suggestion to you is hold it and fix your debt long term to hedge inflation, and write it out, and make sure that you stay on top of things. And and to your point, you have to rip the Band-Aid off with some of these renters and just say, listen, this is where the market is now.
Yeah, that makes sense. So let's talk about a couple things here. I think everyone knows there's a supply issue with real estate, but no one knows why. Back in the good old days of free market capitalism, the cure for high prices were high prices. So if rents got too far out of control, like they are now, then guys like Kenny McElroy would come in and just build a ton of apartments, houses. You obviously you don't discriminate. You're going to make money any way you can. So you'd build whatever the market wants if there's a profit to be had. So again, the cure for high prices are high prices. Well, we're seeing the high prices, but we're not seeing the cure.
Right.
So why? Why is that? Is that because of government intervention and distortions?
It's complicated, but that is one big reason. So if you think about it, if we had the director of housing for Arizona on my YouTube channel and my podcast to talk about this very thing. If you want to build something somewhere, there's massive oversight, which there should be, on zoning, on impact fees, which are connected to all the city services, on the design, how high you can go, all that stuff, parking regulations.
Have you seen that increase, Kenny?
Absolutely.
Since you've been doing this,
Without a doubt,
you've been doing this for decades. Yep. So you've seen that increase a lot. Okay.
Yeah. So one of the things that LA County did, if you think about this, because they're a pretty good, it's a small market, of course, but when you look at the national market, but in LA, so you think about it, let's just say you could put one house on 1 acre, and that's the zoning. That's what the government says. That's all you can do. So in other words, if you wanted to put 2, you cannot.
Right.
But what LA did recently is they relaxed it and said you can now double it, because they're starting to see prices so high. they're starting to see homelessness. And so they're saying, okay, George, you have an acre. We're going to now let you put 2 houses on there. That helps a lot because it helps. So that's one, that's just a zoning. They relax the zoning requirements, but there's a lot of other things that come into play with regard to that. So you can't just point all the fingers at the city. The other thing from a lender standpoint, the lenders, they want their money back, right? So they're taking a look at the cost to build versus the cost to buy and the financing and all that. So a builder can only build if there's a bank there waiting to provide money to somebody to be able to build. And then, of course,
that's, I think, something that the average person doesn't really consider, that when you're taking out these loans for $100 million, they're not really looking at your balance sheet. They're not looking and saying, Ken, what type of car do you have? Or Ken, what's your monthly income? They're looking at the project. They're lending on the project. They're not really lending on Ken McElroy.
That's 1,000%.
Obviously, you're in the equation there, but you're part of the equation with the project. And so I think most people, just because they're 9 to 5, they're usually in the mindset to where that bank is lending on the individual and not the overall project. So it doesn't really make sense to them why banks aren't willing to lend to all of these builders out there that they may have lent to in the past.
Yeah. So a great analogy would be if you go out and buy a car, they're lending against the car.
Right.
And if you can't pay, then they take the car as collateral and they sell that off, and hopefully the car's worth more than the loan. Same thing with real estate. So if I'm going to build something, let's say 200 units, and it's a let's say a $60 million or $50 million project, the lender is looking at that and they're saying, okay, that project is going to pay me back.
Right.
So all the assumptions that I say, one, does Ken have the team, and where's the equity coming from and all that, and they got to check all those boxes. And yes, I'm also a guarantor on the loan, so I'm on the hook financially to be able to.
I didn't know that. You got to personally guarantee those loans
on new construction. You do.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So I have all those things. So I have, let's call it a $30 million construction loan, a $20 million equity. So $50 million to build the project. At the end of the day, if I default, the lender comes in and they're just they don't care about the 20. They just are trying to get that 30 back.
Right.
So it's the same with whether you're buying one house or you're doing a mall or you're doing any kind of big master plan development. It's the same thing. As you start to use the big money, the asset itself, like the car, is what they look at as the collateral.
Yeah. Right. So why is Ken McElroy? I mean, we talked about the rents going up. Let's just use here in Phoenix as an example, because this market so well. Why is Ken McElroy not out there building like hundreds of starter homes? Or why is Ken McElroy not out there building from scratch like 10 or 20 apartment complexes as we speak to satisfy this increase in demand and therefore bring those prices back down?
Sure. Well, it's a great question. So we are trying to buy land. Everybody's in the game. It's like having a Monopoly game and we just doubled the players, right? So like everybody.
Oh, okay. Right.
Everybody's trying to get the land. And so the land's going up and all that. And then at the end of the day, George, of course, it has to work financially. So, and what's very interesting, kind of back to the supply chain issue, let's say we use that same example where there's it costs this $50 million project. Right now, the subcontractors are saying, you know what, Ken, I don't think I can give you a solid bid and a cost on what it's going to cost to frame the project, because I don't know what my cost of lumber is going to be in 5 months, 6 months, 4 months.
Right.
And so you have what's what we used to be able to do is called GMPs, or gross maximum price contracts, which of course you all want. Like, we want to know what our costs are going to be as we build it, because we take that, we go to the bank and get the loan against it. So, so just like anything, you drop your plans, you get all your bids, you go to the bank and they lend against that. Well, now the electrical guy, the sheetrock guy, the lumber guy, the framer, the concrete guy, all those guys, all those companies are going, like, our costs just went up 20 or 30%. Mm-hmm. And so if we do this job for you, we're going to lose money. So there's all these contract issues happening right now between a general contractor, a subcontractor, of what the actual deliverable cost is going to be, because their labor is going up, their supplies are going up. And so those are all, that's a complicated answer to your question, which is, why isn't everyone jumping out and doing this? Because the big uncertainty still today are construction costs and labor costs, because the pool of labor is actually shrinking, and the cost to actually build something is going up as well. And at the end of the day, that all has to work its way out to a home price, right, or a rent price.
Right. So if I'm hearing you correctly, you're saying that rents are increasing dramatically, but they're not increasing fast enough to compensate for the increase in input costs to build more supply.
So that's yet to be seen, but yes. So we have both those things happening at once. So we don't know how far rents are going to grow, of course. And also, that's not necessarily good for the resident themselves. And we also don't know until we know what the lumber costs are going to be, what the construction or what the concrete costs are going to be, and all those kinds of things, until we know. So the first thing that's going to happen is we'll have pure certainty on what it costs to build something. That'll be first. And then after that, because we're committed, we're pregnant already. That's what we say. We're pregnant with this loan. We're pregnant with this deal. There's no turning back. You have to build it. So then at the end of the day, because we projected our rents at, let's say, something when we got the loan, right, we hope that they're going to be higher to cover the operating expenses. And so this is the double-edged sword that even the single family builder has. Yeah. So what they're doing is people will come in and they'll put a deposit down on a home, let's say, that is on the brochure at, say, $250 today on today's costs. But when the home's delivered in, say, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 months, it might be $300.
Right.
And the homeowner then can make the decision, and the home builder now doesn't have to absorb those costs. And so the home buyer has to decide, do I eat those or do I walk away? And the home builder is just selling it to the next person.
Yeah, the problem with that is, I'm sure in those home builders that you're referring to, is they do have a significant amount of downside risk. It's not zero. Right. If prices do go down in nominal terms, and they are left holding the bag, and that's a big bag.
It is.
They're holding. So that's probably what creates even more hesitancy for them to create the additional supply needed in the future. It's all these, this kind of powder keg of increased cost, increased input costs, the unknowns of what they're going to see in the future with the overall market. I mean, they're not the only ones that realize that it's in a bubble.
That's right.
I mean,
yep.
and also too, a lot of these guys like you lived through the GFC.
Yep.
So you're a little gun shy. I mean, I have
a lot gun shy.
I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I would be.
Yep.
I remember that, and it's not. You remember the fact that prices don't always go up forever, and therefore you're a little more apprehensive than you would be, and you combine that with the increased bureaucracy, the increased taxes, the unknowns of what's going to happen in the market, the global economy, what's going to happen with the pandemic, and then the increased input costs. And now, to me, that makes a lot more sense why we're not seeing a lot of supply come in or come online.
Yeah. And there's two things. One is I always tell people, I'm like, if you're under 40, you just don't get it. Right. So it's funny when I have a conversation with somebody who's over 40 and has been through some cycles, they understand this. But if you really think about it, like if you're like, say you came into this market 20 or 10 years ago, you're like, I am the smartest person on the planet. Like things just keep going up and I am making so much money.
Well, tell us your personal story, Kenny. Did you feel that way? And I don't want to put you on the spot, but did you feel that way in like 2004, 5, and 6?
Oh my gosh. Like everyone, we had massive corrections. I have a lot of friends that lost everything in 2008, 9, 10 based on, it's like that, like musical chairs, that last chair. And at some point, so that's why Robert Kiyosaki, our good friend, always says that, flipping, that's why he says the difference between cash flow versus capital gains. You could make really good money flipping and transacting, but at some point it stops. And let's don't forget, like when a home builder builds or an apartment guy builds, we have margin, George, but it's not like everybody thinks. We're paying everybody to build that. And, maybe it's 20%. Well, if the supply chain shrinks that to zero, then the home builder is building that exact house for zero. And so that's
for
why
zero
they have
profit, just to be clear,
yes,
guys.
zero profit.
Talk about zero profit and potentially a loss. Yeah.
Yes. So that's why it's being passed to the homeowner, which then of course translates into a higher rent payment. It's the same with cars. Cars are more expensive. The car payment's more expensive. But the Fed used to be able to have that little interest rate to be able to go up and down and try to help people's monthly payments stay the same. They don't have that mechanism right now.
Yeah.
And so that's the problem we're facing.
Okay. So I think that there's a good chance going into 2022 that we're going to get price controls. And of course, that would include rent control. So how are you analyzing that unknown? I mean, and that
actually pretty simple. Yeah. Well, we just pay attention to the policies of the individual state. So from my standpoint, we're investing in Texas. We're investing in Florida. We're investing in Arizona because, and not to be political here, but those are real issues. Like if you're gonna invest in New York right now, they still have the eviction moratorium in place. They've defunded the police, so you have safety issues. You have rent control there. So lenders, investors, all of those things go, okay, we're going to go over here instead where, to this landlord friendly state. The lenders are going to go there. And so the money is now moving to where the policies were kind of, where they're equal, right? Because the Landlord Tenant Act protects the renter, period. And the landlord, that is the whole point of it. And so, there are policies and laws in place, but they're being changed now. And as people start implementing things like rent controls or rent caps, then what's going to happen is, an investor is going to say, well, it's just like anything. It's like, it'd be like Apple saying, we're going to cap the price of a stock, whenever you start to get involved, and don't forget the other side of that, which we haven't really talked about yet. Property taxes pay for all these other things. So a landlord actually pays property taxes, and those property taxes pay for schools and fire and police and a lot of the services for infrastructure and those kinds of things. We definitely are going to start to see those go up. So you have the property taxes are going to go up in these markets, and the rents are going to get capped. Why would you invest in those markets? Why would you invest in a market where those two things are happening at the same time? So where the smart money is going is it's going to governors that are being pro housing, pro building, and they understand what's happening. And but the biggest issue still is going to be rent growth, even with all of that.
Yeah, so you're hedging your downside with rent control by the specific market you choose to invest in.
Yes.
So, okay. So you and I went skiing probably what was that? Maybe 9 months ago. We were up in Park City, and you were nice enough to invite me up there with probably 10 or 12 of your really good buddies.
Yep.
And I will tell the viewers and listeners, they may be incredibly surprised to know this, but pretty much all your buddies are real estate guys. They're all apartment guys.
Yep.
In some way, they're in this business. So my point is, they're all smart guys, and they see what you see going on in Minneapolis, in New York City, going on in Houston and Phoenix and in Florida. So I'm assuming they're doing the exact same thing. So you are getting an incredible amount of competition for this land that you're trying to buy, or maybe for these apartments, these deals that you're trying to do. So at what point do the margins get squeezed to where all of these competitors that you're dealing with are buying properties at too high of a price, even for a Florida or for a Texas? Like, how, as Ken McElroy sits there, how does he determine if he's overpaying for something? And I'm sure that because there's so much competition, and at what point do you just say, okay, there's nothing to invest in? Or, how does your strategy work when it comes?
Well, I'll give you some interesting numbers, because we're now at the end of the year. Last year, we underwrote, which means we looked at and did the analysis. We had our analysts run on hundreds and hundreds of projects. We actually made offers on 87 deals in 2021. So these are all, call it $20 to $50 million deals. We made offers on 87 of those. Of those 87, we got 3.
Wow.
So now it's not untypical for us to make an offer on, let's say, a project, and there'll be 40 or 50 offers. And then there's sometimes 2 rounds of best and finals, which basically means that's this fine dance of how much you offer to get into best and final. And then, the seller is going to say, is this your best bid? And, and then, so you got to leave what we call dry powder for the next deal, or, for the next one and the next one. So you have to know what your max is, and you have to know what it takes just to get in. And so it's this dance between the seller and the buyer. And there's all kinds of things. The due diligence term is one. Can you do it in 5 days, 10 days due diligence, which is aggressive, instead of 30 or 60, let's say? Can you put hard money up day one? So the deal I'm offering today, actually, this $122 million deal, we're putting $2 million up hard.
Mm-hmm.
So these are things that you have to do now to just get in the game. And then from there, you better make sure that your underwriting was correct, because at the end of the day, we need $42 million to buy this $122 million deal. Well, there are real investors there that want real returns, and so the properties have to pay that back.
Right.
So you have to make sure that all that math works before you actually go into this game. And then the hardest part, George, of course, is walking away from the majority of those 87 deals and knowing that, okay, somebody just raised it $1 million, $2 million, $500,000. What does that do for our return and our investor return? So you kind of have to know going in, where is your max? And
you have to be very disciplined.
Very disciplined, yes.
So if you're missing out if you're bidding on 87 deals, I think that was the number, you're only getting 3. That means, in your opinion, there's 84 people who are overpaying.
Well, in my opinion, but if you go back 1 year from now and you looked at the rent growth that they had 1 year ago, that, and there's a lot of people out raising capital right now. Maybe you go back and go, man, I probably should have maybe bought 10 or 12 more of those deals. Now it's in hindsight, but at the time, we're pretty conservative with the way that we're underwriting things. So,
right.
So I like to underwrite 3 or 4% annual rent growth. Well, markets are doing 10 plus. I would never underwrite that, because, it's just, they're historical highs.
Right.
And so there has to be a conservative piece to you. I think, and the guys that have been in the business a long time. So you know, they're much more disciplined like this. And the ones that, you
The
know,
guy's over 40 years old.
yeah, you know, I'll tell you the person you got to be most careful of, you know, and I'm just going to pick on him right now. The millennial that's just a $100 million fund.
All right.
Because, you know, because now they have the pressure of having the capital in the fund and they have to deploy it.
Yeah, right.
So, and I'll tell you one quick funny story. So Ross and I decided to exit a couple deals and roll or do a 1031, which is a tax deferred exchange way to do that into these other ones. So we put a deal out through a broker, through a big national broker, and we picked a buyer. So the buyer sent me the business plan soliciting me to invest in their deal.
Oh, yeah.
And so I was the seller.
And they didn't know that. Yeah.
So anyway, so it's sometimes it's comical, you know, and it doesn't happen a lot, but you know, to be able to see a deal that you own, you've run, you have the financials on, you understand completely, and then get a business plan from somebody else's perspective is actually kind of nice to be able to say, okay, what do they see that I didn't see? And you know, I'm not going to pick on them too hard, but I will tell you, you could put whatever you want in a business plan and raise capital.
Yeah, right.
And
it doesn't necessarily mean it's accurate.
Correct. And so that, you know, if you're an LP or an investor, those are the questions you need to ask, you know, because you can put anything you want in these business plans. You can put any kind of rent growth in there. You can say whatever you want. You can say, I'm going to cut expenses 10%, 20%, which I've never, ever seen happen. You know, so you can do whatever you want to hit whatever numbers you want and raise capital based on that. And so that's kind of what we're dealing with right now is we have a lot of people raise a lot of capital investing in these projects because you know why? The pressure of deploying the capital.
Yeah, right. That makes a lot of sense. Man, I mean, if we had another hour, I'd love to go into the conversation of how the Fed is really creating this phenomenon and just, you know, creating this boom bust cycle that we're eventually going to see where guys like you are going to still be in the game because you're experienced, you're pros, and you have the discipline to bid on 87 properties and only buy 3 of them. But there are those 84 guys out there that, yes, they may have gotten lucky over the last year, but they're doing their deals based on pro forma rents at 10% increases. And at some point, that game of musical chairs has to end. And that's a result of Fed just pumping the system with just massive amounts of liquidity, keeping interest rates low, yields low, and just pushing people further and further out the risk curve. So
that's exactly it.
Kenny, what are you doing in addition to sticking with Arizona, Texas, Florida, to limit your downside? I think you're among your peers, you're very conservative as far as how much cash you keep in the bank for each property in case your occupancy rate isn't exactly where you want it to be. And then I think your LTV might be a little bit lower, but what else do you do?
Yeah. Well, to your point, George, we have, last I looked, we had 21 million in cash to make sure that we're fine. You know, our LTVs are in the 60s, and what that means is loan to values. And we have a lot of equity and we have low, loans to value. The other thing that I really focus on is a lot of people buy things, let's say, be the equivalent of, I'm going to buy this house for 100 grand and I hope next year it's 120.
Right.
So that's gambling. That's that's being lucky that the market took you to where, and by the way, we also want that, but that's not how you should base your investment. So what we do is what we call forced equity.
Right.
So the deal that I just bought in Austin, Texas, it's an existing property built in the 90s. There's $411 in rent growth based on the current market. So if you take a look at my property, the one we just bought in October, and the surrounding market, there's $411 of rent lift. Okay, $400 at 455 units at a 4 cap is a $50 million value add. So that's 400 times 455 divided by 4%.
Got it.
So that's a 4 cap. So when I look at something, I'm looking at what I would call forced equity. So the equity to buy that property was 30 million. I have a $50 million value add. Now, I might be wrong. It might be $30 million value add. We'll see as we start to roll this thing out and we start to renovate units and all that kind of stuff. It's back to the basic math. But I feel like my equity, when I buy it, is covered by my forced equity, not by the market. So a lot of people.
It's something within your control. That's the bottom line. You're not just going out there and buying $1 for $2 and hoping it goes to $3. You're out there, you're buying $1 for 50 cents and you're making the improvements. You're going in there and you're putting in maybe a washer dryer into every single unit. You're putting in maybe I think back in the day it used to be granite. Now it's probably quartz countertops. You're putting in stainless steel appliances. You might be putting in some tile flooring instead of the old school carpet. You're repainting. You're doing these types of things, and you're buying it for 50 cents. You're putting in 25 cents, but then at the end you've got that $1 worth of value instead of just relying on the market just pushing it up and you just kicking back and praying.
That's exactly right, George. And then in addition to that, we're trying to obviously buy in markets that are trending up. So this property is in Austin, and Austin is arguably one of the hottest markets in the country right now.
Right.
So, I just flew there last week and looked and toured this property and went through all these numbers. That's why I know it's 411. But yes, and so you're trying to do all of those things. You're trying to buy something that's been neglected and improve it through good management and some money. And you're trying to find a market that's trending the right direction.
Right. And then trying to juggle not only what you think the rent increase or what the potential for rent increase, but also the potential for your cost increase.
Yeah.
Trying to predict that. And that's what makes it so
that's
difficult
right.
to do these things. Right.
Like, because we are, like, to your point, we're doing washers and dryers. Washers and dryers used to be 800 a set. Now they're 1,200. That's just a fact.
Right.
So that is what it is. And so, but we're still doing them. We're still putting 455 sets of washers and dryers in this exact property. And that will be another $50 per month per unit.
All right, Kenny. Well, I know we've gone pretty much an hour right here. So for all of my viewers who want to find out more about what you do, where can they go?
Oh, thanks, George. Yeah, just go to www.kenmcelroy.com. That's KenMcElroy. We got a ton of videos. We got a very fun YouTube channel that we do. I do on Mondays. But yeah, as you know, George, 95% of my time is out doing deals. And so I really, really enjoy the YouTube stuff. It's real, it's authentic, and it's exactly stuff that we're working on today.
Yeah, but you're like the opposite of most kind of real estate gurus, in the sense that most of the real estate gurus, they don't actually invest in real estate. All they do is YouTube videos, where you are an actual real estate investor first and foremost. And then, that 1% of your time, then you allocate it to YouTube. So people need to really understand that you're the real deal. And you're also going to be speaking at Rebel Capitalist Pro here in Houston, January 7th through the 9th. You can get tickets there at rebelcapitalistlive.com. And then I see you're wearing a Collective t-shirt. We don't really talk about this too often.
I know. Yeah, I know.
You, me, and Jason. Hartman, I don't know, maybe 9 months ago or so, we decided to set up a mastermind group that's been really successful. And we just got an incredible group of people. So for the viewers who want to find out more about our mastermind group, they can go to a website. It's, I believe, the collectiveadvisors.com. Does that sound right, Kenny?
Yep, that's right. Yeah. What happened was we all have big followings, and everybody wants some access, I guess, to us. And so we created this mastermind. The three of us were sitting down over a couple of beers in Florida and said, let's do this. And it's been really fun, though. The first event we had, I think, was great. Members of, and of course, all we've done so far is pull people up from our Rolodex, but that's been, it's been quite the Rolodex, once we all sit down, the three of us, and see, who's in our Rolodex. So those people are coming, they show up, they speak, you get to meet with all of them. It's been wonderful.
Yeah, it was a good mix and match, the three of us, because although we know a lot of the same people, we have different people in each Rolodex, and you bring that, like, as an example, I brought Robert Barnes there. Most people know him. Lynn Alden spoke, and then we had you brought in Carrie Lake, who was running for governor. Like, I didn't know her. And then you brought in one of the coolest guys I've ever met in my life, and that would be Michael Waltrip.
Michael's great.
The NASCAR driver, for those of you who don't know. And then of course, Kiyosaki was there and everything. So it was just a really, really neat experience. It definitely exceeded my expectations, and I can't wait for the next one. So anyway, if you're interested in that, guys, just check out the collectiveadvisors.com. Kenny, have a great, fantastic New Year's, buddy, and we'll see you in Houston.
Yeah, you too, George. Thanks for having me on, and let's do it again.
Hi, guys. I'd like to invite each and every one of you to the next Rebel Capitalist live event. If you are a fan of the Rebel Capitalist show, I guarantee you will love the live event. The next one is Houston, where you can meet and listen to speakers, all your favorites from the Rebel Capitalist show. People such as Dr. Ron Paul, Chris Cole, Lynn Alden, just to name a few. If you want to check out the rest of the speaker list and find out how you can attend, we'll put a link in the description below, or you can just go to rebelcapitalistlive.com. This is an event where you can learn to build wealth and thrive in a world of out-of-control central banks and big governments. But it's not just about building wealth. It's about increasing your freedom and networking with like-minded individuals, fellow rebel capitalists. It's an amazing event. I know you'll absolutely love it. Check out rebelcapitalistlive.com, and I will see you in Houston.